Hello and welcome to Homegrown Florida. I'm Katrina. We're going to be walking through how to start plants by seed today. Growing food in my backyard garden is one of my biggest passions. I absolutely love every moment of it. From the hope you get when you're planning your spring season all the way to harvesting like fresh fruits and vegetables and making them into a meal for your family. It gives me so much joy, every piece of the process. And it's amazing to me that unlike many other things in life, it's more of an art than it is a science. And what works one year might not work the next. You have to be really reading the climate and the seasons rather than just following steps or a schedule. If I had to grow my garden from transplants, this would be a very expensive hobby that I would not be able to sustain. Transplants at the big box stores are running anywhere from $5 to $7 a piece. Even with food prices going up, that is just not financially sustainable, at least not for me. The most cost-effective way to grow your own food is by starting plants from seed, whether that's seeds you buy or seeds that you save yourself from your own garden. It's by far the very best option financially and lots of other ways too. But starting seeds can be a pretty big challenge when you're first starting to learn. I'm still not perfect at it, but I have gotten to a point now where I'm much more consistent with my success. And so I wanted to break it down for you step by step so that you can see exactly how to do it. And then you can start getting more experience with it and hopefully maybe avoid some of the pitfalls that I have had to experience. We're going to be growing 3 plants together through this video: broccoli, lettuce, and sunflowers. The first step in growing seeds is determining whether the seeds you are starting are better as direct seeded or as transplants. Direct seed just means that the seeds are planted in their forever home in a bed, container, or in the ground. Usually the seed packet will tell you if they should be direct seeded or if they're better as transplants. This usually includes vegetables like cucumbers, squash, melons, peas, and beans. There's probably more out there, but direct seeded plants tend to have difficulty when they're grown in trays because their roots are super sensitive. The simple act of just removing them from the tray and planting them into bed could be disruptive enough to cause them to die. Mainly because they have something called a taproot that is long and it's deep, and when it's touched, it can have a negative impact on the plant. That's why they're not recommended to be transplanted. Then you have seeds like tomatoes and peppers, where they usually do their best starting in trays and then potting them up until they are large enough to be transplanted in the garden. It's not to say you can't direct seed these. Most plants can be directed seeded, but there's a lot of reasons why you might want to start them in trays. One of the biggest ones is lack of space. You don't have a place for them in your garden, or it's weather, whether it's too cold or too hot to start them straight out in the garden. This is a big one for plants that have very long growing seasons, like peppers and tomatoes. Then there are plants that you can do either way, and they do best, like lettuce. You can transplant them or you can direct seed them. A lot of the times I do both. There are pros and cons to both methods. So like direct seeding is always easier, but you don't have as much control over the weather. So you usually have a higher rate of failure in the seedlings. That's why a lot of the times when you're direct seeding, they will say to seed more than what you need and then to thin the plants. Because if you do have a failure, you have backup seeds already in the ground. On the other hand, trays usually require a lot more effort, hands-on work, but you can control how much sun, rain, wind that occurs to these seedlings, which normally means that they have a better outcome when they are younger. But transplanting them can be a challenge, and that's the point where you might experience a higher rate of loss, which sucks because you've gotten the plants that far and then they die at transplant. If I had to pick a favorite, it would be trays. Having more control over the seedlings when they're very young usually leads me to healthier plants in the long run. So let's start some seeds in trays. The first step when starting seeds is the soil you plan on using. I'm going to fill these 2-inch trays with one side potting soil and the other side my seed starting mix. I'm using a seed starting tray, but you can also use all sorts of things like toilet paper rolls, old pots, egg cartons. Sky's the limit. Lots of things work as long as they drain water from the bottom. Otherwise, you'll have something called root rot from the water being so wet that the roots actually drown. Now let's go back to the soil. The biggest difference between these two types of soil is the texture and the water absorption. Potting soil tends to have larger pieces of material like sticks, wood chips, like things like that. And those things don't hold water as efficiently as like a seed starting mix. However, potting mix is much easier to find and seed starting mix is a little bit more difficult. I actually make my own seed starting mix because of this, but it's not something that you have to do. You can purchase it. My seed starting mix is made of coconut coir, some compost, and then usually I add something that will help it drain like sand or perlite. I usually add a bit of nutrients too, but that is completely optional. You can always feed the plants later with a liquid fertilizer. I'm just lazy about it, so I add my nutrients into the mix and then I don't have to worry about it. So I'm using both types of soil in this video so you can see the difference between how seedlings grow in the two different mediums. You'll see as we go along that the seed starting mix tends to grow better than the potting mix. If you can only get your hands on potting mix, try sifting out some of those bigger pieces of sticks and wood. You'll see that both ways work, but there is a noticeable difference in their growth patterns. Before you plant your seeds, make sure that your soil, whatever kind that you plan on using, is pre-soaked. Just get it really nice and wet. Next step is you're going to be dealing with the planting depth. You can read the seed packet to find out how deep to plant the seed, but I always go by the rule that you should plant the seed as deep as the seed is big. So for these broccoli and lettuce seeds, they are very, very small. So I just make a small dent in the soil using the back of my marker. I then drop the seed in that little indentation I made. Then I take the little bit of soil that I kind of pushed out of the way by pushing down that pen, and I kind of push it back over on top of the seed. And then I usually tap the top of the soil just so that the dirt touches the seed, but I don't pack it down tightly. I want the soil over the top of the seed to be loose, not compact, but it's important that the soil is touching the seed. You want that soil to be like a little wet, light blanket covering and wrapping around the seed. So the seed stays moist, but also has room inside that little indentation that you made to push that little seedling up and out of the ground. If it meets with too much resistance, it will give up and it will fail to emerge from the soil. That's why seed starting mix is great rather than potting mix, because all those little sticks in the potting mix could be too heavy for the seed to push up through. So for the sunflower, the seed is a bit bigger and it's pointy. Some seeds have a pointy end, things like corn and cucumber. The pointy end is where the roots will come out of the seed. And you always wanted that pointed downward. Since the seed is bigger, you want it to go deeper into the soil too. The reason it needs to be deeper is that so there is enough soil to hold that stem up when it grows. Otherwise, it can get top heavy and like fall over. After you've planted the seed, I always mist it with water to make sure that there's enough water being held right at the top point where that seed lives. I live in a super hot, humid climate, like Florida. But if you are in a drier climate, you will want to use a humidity dome. That's that clear plastic tray that goes on top. And that's going to trap that water and heat, which the seed really needs during this delicate phase of its growing. Now you need a place for the trays to sit for the next few days. Most seeds, not all, but most seeds don't require sunlight to germinate. Germination is just a term that we use when we're talking about that seed breaking open, the roots developing downwards, and then the seedling emerging up out through the soil. During that time, heat and water are your two biggest things it needs. Sometimes you can achieve that from a sunny spot in your yard. Other times it might be best to do this part inside your house. It really depends on how cold it is or how hot it is outside. I live where it's very hot. So for me, I don't want to put these seedlings out in the sun because they could easily overheat and not germinate. Most people talk about, it being warm enough for them to germinate, but there is a limit to the heat that they can experience. So there is a top point of being too hot. Also, the sun beats down on them so hot that the water that's on there will quickly evaporate and dry out the seeds. So I just put mine on my patio on a super shady spot. My trick with this is to place them where you're going to see them every single day, whether that's walking out to your car to go to work. For me, I walk my dogs past this spot every day so they can go to the potty. And so it gives me a chance to check to see if they need more of the misting of the water. And I leave that water bottle right next to them. So as I'm walking by, just grab it, spray, keep on with my day. Once the seeds do emerge, or at least half of them have emerged, I move them directly to a spot that gets at least 4 hours of sun a day. It's kind of shocking that these little guys can handle being like right out in the intense Florida sun so fast, but they really do love it. If you fail to move them to a sunny spot, once they emerge, they'll become leggy. And leggy, this is a really common thing for new gardeners. Really, really common. It just means that the seedling is stretching super, super tall, and you might even see them stretch towards a left or a right or a front or a back because they're trying to reach that sun. And when they stretch like that super quickly, what ends up happening is the stem gets super thin, and then the top has the leaves that become top heavy, and then they fall over. And that's when they die. So it's super important to get it out in the sun as soon as they emerge. Once you've moved them to a sunny spot, now you will want to start watering them from the bottom. If you continue to water them from the top, two things could happen. They could get a fungal issue, which causes something called dampening off, which means the seedlings will start to show signs of stress and eventually will die. You'll usually start to see the leaves like having like black spots, dying off, super yellow color. They just really look sad looking. It's all downhill from there. There's no point in saving those seedlings. They will die. But watering them from the bottom usually solves this problem. Second, by watering from the top, you are not encouraging those roots that came out from the seedling to move downwards towards the water source. Deep roots lead to healthy plants. If the roots are constantly looking upward for the water source, they won't grow down, and then they won't create a strong base for the plant. Once your seedlings have emerged, you are waiting for 2 to 4 true leaves to form. You're probably like, what are true leaves? True leaves are different than the first leaves that you see come up when they're seedlings. Those are called seed leaves. When the seedling emerges from the soil, 2 leaves will form. Those are the first 2 seed leaves, and they do not look like the leaves that the plant will have when it's full grown. That's why we call them seed leaves, and the other leaves, we call them true leaves. What you want is 2 to 4 of the true leaves. So count it as 4 to 6, right? So you got your 2 seed leaves, and then you'll have your 2 true leaves, and then you might get 2 more true leaves. They usually come in at 2 or 3 at a time. Those are the leaves that you want to start counting. So when you have 2 to 4 true leaves is when you want to consider transplanting them. It doesn't hurt the seedlings to live in the tray beyond this point. So they can get a lot more leaves than that. You don't want to wait too long because if they can outgrow the tray and the roots can wrap around the bottom of the tray. But they can live in there for about a month or so depending on the plant. Just make sure you feed it some fertilizer after about a week or 2. Liquid fertilizer is best since granular fertilizer takes time to break down, which the seedling can't really wait for. That's why I put fertilizer in my seed starting mix, so by the time the seed is germinated, the nutrients are available to it. That's the way I get around it. You can use liquid fertilizer, that works too. Now let's see how we transplant these little guys. I have a spoon I use to scoop them. This is my trusty spoon. I use it for everything. You can also just flip them out and dump them out into your hand. I almost always break a stem when I do it this way, when they're small, so I use the spoon technique. Just make sure you're scooping down to the very bottom so that you don't hurt those roots. Then I dig a small hole and I just drop that whole seedling in the hole. This part is going to look pretty aggressive, but it is an important step. You must push the seedling down into the hole so that the roots make impact with the soil below. You don't want there to be a gap where the roots are just exposed to like open air. You want them tucked into the soil so that they're touching. I always push the top because the top is actually less sensitive than the roots. Now we have to water them in really good. Usually I water them by hand for the first 2 or 3 days. That's all it'll take. After that, my sprinkler system takes over and takes care of watering them for the rest of their life, which for me, I usually do 2 times a week for 30 minutes, 20 or 30 minutes. But every garden is different. I could do a whole nother video on watering. The easiest way to know what your garden is like and your soil is to water really good, mark the day, and then stick your finger in the soil every day until that soil is dry. That will tell you how many times a week you need to water. You need to water whenever that soil dries up. But if you check it every single day, you'll notice how it's drying up, and that will tell you how often you need to water your garden. If you've gotten your seedlings to this point, you should be good. They are successful. You've got them in their home. Now, stuff can still happen to them, but this is the big part. You have gotten seedlings to grow from seed, to germinate, and now they're living successfully in their forever home. Congratulations. I hope you found this video helpful. Here is another way that you can start stubborn seeds that is completely foolproof, works for me every single time. Check it out.